Now, it's important to really state something specific about Jerusalem and generally with regards to entitlement to land, because this is one of the problems that I see in the response. The response, the outcry in the response. There are also lessons for Muslims to learn with regards to why do we not? You have to remember that the land is God's. All land is God's. You are merely a vicegerent here. You're just somebody who's taking care of things while you're here, until the time that you depart. So you don't actually possess anything. So you have to look at the response and think about, all right, is in our response a problem? If you browse around Arab Twitter, you will find many using the hashtags Al-Quds Arabiya, Jerusalem is Arab, it's an Arab land. Al-Quds Asimatu Falastin al-Abadiyya, Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine forever. What you basically see are these nationalistic, colonialist terms being utilized in liberation type of activism. And in that is a problem. But we'll get into that in a second. I just want to turn your attention to some things with regards to Jerusalem specifically, because we need to get out of this notion in our heads. We need to get it out that Jerusalem is some Arab land. Once you restrict it to Arab, you've basically said about 300 and some odd million people have a right to this land, whereas opposed to the rest of Muslims across the globe, 1.8 billion, so 1.5 billion Muslims, step aside. Your activism and your outcry should be in relation to, we want freedom. And it's almost like this language also, when you compare Palestine to South Africa, and you talk about it in that term, all of this is just in terms of nationalistic and anti-colonialist type of discourses. And that, you should not look at Jerusalem and that land in that term. This is a sacred, holy land, and it transcends your nationalism and your tribalism. Contrary to every discourse that you come across, this is not, for Muslims, this is not about nationalism. It's not just about that is part of it, but it is not the whole story. Jerusalem, for instance, for Muslims, you're talking about the first Qibla. As an aside, whenever you think of sacred land, most Muslims you talk to, they think of Mecca and Medina. Jerusalem, for many people, is something that they have to actively think of. The reflexive reaction is Mecca and Medina, of course. But then they have to think about Jerusalem. Jerusalem needs to become a reflexive response. What are your holy sites? Mecca, Medina, Jerusalem. Mecca wal Medina wal Quds. You really have to get that through your head. This needs to be a reactionary response to you. That when you think of the sacred sites in Islam, Jerusalem needs to be a reactive response. It should not be something that you have to think about. But unfortunately, the way that we talk about these sacred sites and the way that we talk about Jerusalem as an Arab land, it creates this cognitive distance for people, the psychological distance. And so we think about Palestine purely in terms of anti-settler efforts, BDS just for the sake of, apartheid. They think about all of these. They're useful. I don't want to say that don't do this. They're useful. But for Muslims, you need to remember that this is not about land possession per se. Yes, Palestinians have more right to it in land as inhabitants of it because they've been dispossessed. That is part of it. But there is a grand, bigger picture here. The thing is, when you think about these things in political terms and you think about them as deals, what are deals for? It's for compromise. It's for you to give some and take some. Well, you know what? When it comes to Jerusalem and that land, there is no compromise. Imagine for a second somebody coming to you and you hear about some settling, some power coming into Mecca and Medina and saying, all right, we're going to take over now. And then they're going to negotiate with you what you can and can't do. As a Muslim, will you accept that?